Hello and welcome to the Life and Memoir Circle, a podcast for readers, writers and tellers of true life stories who loves a good memoir. I'm your host, Vig Gleason, and you are exactly the person I want to have a conversation with today. So use the link in the show notes and get in touch. I can't wait to hear your story. It is great to be back. In this episode, I will talk about what my memoir is about. But firstly, I want to say a great big thank you for all the amazing feedback and questions on the first 2 episodes of my podcast. The overwhelming majority of you thought me a very important lesson, that I should talk about my book because not everybody listening knows what it is about. Duh! So here it goes. Speak Truth Lies is about the emotional roller coaster that completely unraveled me when my father died. At the time, we lived in Cairo, where Shane, my husband, worked in the Irish embassy. So I was far away from Norway, where my father lived. So when my brother, Christian, rang me in July 2018 to tell me that our father had died, it wasn't grief or shock that hit me first, but the question, now what? I hadn't spoken to my father in years, and it had been 15 years since I last saw him. I lived with that estrangement as a sense of failure on my part. And I always wondered what it would be like when he died. When I thought about him, I had this dream scene out of a movie where he calls me to come and sit by his deathbed and we would have this final conversation about what went wrong in our relationship. I wanted him to apologize for all the times he'd been so horrible to me. And I wanted to tell him that I forgave him, that it was okay. Because being together again was really all that matters in those final hours of his life. I was desperate to connect and learn that he loved me after all. But obviously, that's not what happened. It's really hard to love ourselves when the evidence that we're not loved by a parent is stacked high against us. For years, I wondered what it would be like when my father died. I could even see a scenario where I wasn't even told that he'd died. My father was a sea captain, and in my childhood and teens, he worked on oil tankers all over the world. In the early years of my life, he could be out at sea for as long as 18 months at a time, with only a short 2 to 3 months at home in between. One of the revelations I had after he died was something my mum told me about. That it was normal for children of seafarers to be afraid of their fathers when they return home from sea. Wow. Just thinking about this fills me with sadness for every child with fathers who works for long periods away from home. And there are so many of us. I do think it's possible to have a good relationship with an absent father. But sadly, I was really fearful of mine all my life, even after he died. It was this fear in the wake of his death that I struggled to come to terms with. I knew I needed to overcome it because holding on to that fear was holding me back and thinking less of myself than I truly am. So I had this desperate desire to understand how to let go of the fear. And I also had this feeling of being a victim of a world that hadn't given me a father, or at least not the kind of father I believed I deserved, the kind of father all children deserves. So that's the crux of what my memoir is about. It opens a week after that phone call from my brother to tell me your father had died. And you see myself and Ruby, she's my daughter, she was 11 at the time, arriving at Otley Island. This is where my father lived for 17 years. And we went there, together with my brother, to bury the captain. That's what I called him. you'll find out why. So it was when I got to his house that I really started to unravel. I had been there on a visit once before. At the time, he was a roaring alcoholic, which he pretty much was throughout the time when I lived at home with my parents until I was 20. When I started to discover who my father really was through his journals and documents, I also found out that part of my own story had been built on a lie. And when I was going through all the mess of his house, memories of my childhood, traumatic events that most of us would probably say it's best to let dead dogs lie, came back to me in floods. And I needed to unpack all this, because without understanding the impact of these childhood events had on my life, I would continue to suffer with anxiety and the enduring question of why I was incapable of living an emotionally good life. And I did live a good life, but emotionally I was pretty much out at sea a lot of the time. So throughout the writing of the memoir, I was hustling with the inner critic, the imposter syndrome, and the fear that I wasn't good enough to complete, let alone publish my memoir. I'll talk more about that in another episode. But for now, I hope this has given you enough of an idea of what the book is about, so you can decide whether you want to read it or not. Because this book is not for everyone. This is a book for those of us who have a feeling of being unmoored in our life. We kind of feel a bit uncertain about how our past is defining how we live our lives right now. And it's a book about finding freedom from that past so that we can live that good life that we deserve. Not in a material way, but emotionally, that we feel at ease with our past and who we are, and that we are confident in speaking our own truth. I know me telling you what the book is about isn't the same as reading it for yourself and coming on the journey with me. So I thought, to give you a better feel for what that would be like, I'm going to record the first chapter of my memoir for you, like a bonus episode, so you can listen to it. Obviously, you can go on Amazon and get a sample of the 3 first chapters. They're also available from my website, so I'll leave you a link to that in the show notes if you prefer to read it yourself instead of listening. But if you enjoy listening, then keep listening and please keep sending me your messages. I love hearing from you. To all of you who have already shared your story with me, thank you. Thank you so much. I treasure your stories. And it's so amazing how similar our stories are, even though we grew up at different times, in different countries, even on different continents. There is always something in our past that we would like to get off our chest, as it were. So keep sending me your stories. If you are already on my email circular, that is obviously the easiest way to get hold of me, because you can just reply to my email. Thank you so much for listening. I would love to hear your thoughts about this episode and how it relates to your story. Use the link in the show notes to contact me, or find me on Facebook or Instagram at Vig Gleeson. That's VIGGLEESON. You can also find me by doing a quick Google search, because there is only one Vig Gleeson in the world. So I'm very easy to find. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give me a 5-star rating and share it with your friends. It's so important to me that stories like ours gets heard, for it helps others to heal too. There are many more episodes to come, So please hit subscribe so you won't miss a single one. With love from me to you, I'm Vig Gleason, and you have been listening to the Life and Memoir Circle podcast. Until next time, write on.